Hi everybody, welcome back to Film School, classes in session. I'm your professor, Professor Grew, and today we're taking a look at one of the big questions in cinema. How much of American Psycho is in Patrick Bateman's head? Is he completely crazy? Did any of this happen? Did some of this happen? Did none of this happen? Did it all happen? What is going on in American Psycho? So we're going to be taking a look at that today. Just a brief notice about just this channel and the content I've been producing. A lot of my videos have been content blocked for no reason, just because I'm a smaller channel. Other people are putting out similar videos. They're not getting content struck, so it's just YouTube buffoonery, really, that's happening. So I'm going to try something a little bit different with this format, and we'll see if that works out. So the big question is, how much of this happened? How much of this movie is in his head versus how much of it is reality? And there's a couple of takes on that. The first is that none of it is in his head. It all happened. The second is that all of it is in his head. He completely imagined being a serial killer and killing all these people, doing all these horrible things. Some of it is in his head, but some of it is imagined, because he's a crazy psychopath after all. And the fourth theory is none of it really matters, because this is all just a metaphor for pervasive Wall Street culture. So let's go through a few of these all together. So the first is that none of this matters. This is all a metaphor. I'm going to dismiss this out of hand. Number one, this is boring. It's a very boring theory. If all we're seeing is a metaphor, none of it happens, even within the context of the movie. So, I mean, for the sake of it being boring, you can dismiss it. But the other thing is, you can dismiss it because it can be both a metaphor and the things in the movie are happening actually. Like, it can be both things. You can both have a story which is a metaphor and is real unto its own worlds. I mean, the obvious examples of this is everybody is very heightened, everybody speaks in this very fake way. Even some of the arguments that are brought up when Christian Bale is splitting up with Reese Witherspoon, she says, no, we can't do that because my friends are your friends, so it won't work. And he says famously, you can have them. You know, everybody's kind of a little bit cartoonish and over the top, but I see that more as a commentary on Wall Street culture. But those characters can still be real characters. They can still be real human beings who are doing stuff there. So that's not really an issue. So we can just dismiss this whole thing is a metaphor thing right out of hand. You don't need that. The movie works well if you believe in the characters and it has real stakes, but it can still be symbolic of pervasive materialism and that kind of 80s Wall Street mentality at the same time. The second theory, that none of this is in his head and this is all real, well, that's a fun theory, because you know, you have this serial killer running around. He's the wolf in sheep's clothing. You think he's a respectable business guy. He speaks in this very polite, very reserved manner. You know, in the beginning, somebody makes an offhand comment and he says, lay off the anti-Semitism. And later in the movie, he talks about how you basically have to be interested in social ills. And he goes on and he pontificates about that for a long time in the bar. And people say, well said, Patrick. So it's interesting if he's just completely a serial killer. There's a siren going by. I wonder if that's Patrick Bateman committing another murder. Why this can't possibly be the case is because you'd have to ignore the whole feed me a kitten scene, where he takes a kitten and the vending machine is saying feed me a cat. Not the vending machine, the ATM machine. He tries to shove a kitten into an ATM machine and then starts a shootout with the police, where he fires one shot at a police car, it explodes like in an action movie, and Patrick Bateman even looks at the gun like, what is going on? You would have to ignore all of that completely. Stuff that just doesn't make sense. The movie is deliberately calling out the fact that this stuff doesn't make sense, even within the context of the world. So we can dismiss the fact that none of this is in his head, and this is all real, right out of the gate. The next theory is a lot of fun. All of it is in his head. What if all of this is just imagined by Patrick Bateman? There's the idea that he's so repressed that he just has to go on and he has to have these fantasies because he's so repressed in his life. You know, there's that great line where he's with a girl and they're saying that all acquisitions managers hate their jobs, and of course that's what Patrick Bateman, that's his job, and even though we see him a lot, we don't see him working a lot. We see him faking work. We see him very obsessed with status. We see him worried about what everybody else's card looks like and stuff like that. So it's it's that kind of thing where you can't you see him as somebody who's this very shallow character who would need to have these elaborate fantasies and would need to act out these elaborate fantasies in order to basically feel some kind of agency in his life. And we also see that Patrick Bateman is a character who other characters don't have a high opinion of. They think he's weak. Paul Allen, when Paul Allen mistakes him for someone else who's got the same job as him, Paul Allen basically tells him, yeah, Patrick Bateman is just, he's whatever, right? He's a weakling. And then his lawyer, when he calls his lawyer and confesses everything at the end of the film, his lawyer even says, your big mistake in the story is you said that Patrick Bateman, you pretended to be Patrick Bateman and said that you were running around killing people. Patrick Bateman would never do that. He doesn't have the backbone, is essentially what his lawyer tells him. So essentially you also get in Patrick Bateman a character who is very obsessed with his own image. We see him in the beginning going through his body scrub regimen, what he's doing to his hair, his face, his skin. He literally peels off his skin and says that Patrick Bateman is an illusion. He doesn't exist. He's just an image. And later we see many examples of Patrick Bateman being obsessed with his appearance. When he's engaged in violent or sexual acts, he's very intent on what he's doing, not so much the other participant. He will pontificate about the music he likes. He'll wear music and he'll be annoyed that his girlfriend is talking to him in the car and not want to engage in that relationship because he really wants to just focus on the music. And then when he's having sex with the prostitutes, you can see him admiring himself almost aggressively in the mirrors. He almost doesn't care what they're doing. And in the beginning, they're going at it together and he's kind of instructing them. It's kind of got like a power fantasy thing going on. But he's more interested in pontificating on music. I think he's talking about Whitney Houston at that point and just going on about the music he likes. So this image he's projecting to the world, and his image is something he's very concerned about, but other people don't have him in high regard. So when you're so obsessed with your outward appearance and your outward image, but other people don't regard you, they forget you for other people, or they think of you as weak or disposable, or they brush you off, you need to have this elaborate fantasy where you're in control, where you have power. And that's where the notebook comes in. Gene finds the notebook at the end of the crude drawings of all the women dismembered and decapitated, and it's supposed to be like a serial killer's journal. But it's compounded. The fact of this is compounded by the fact that if this is all an elaborate fantasy, if this is all just Patrick Bateman's self-loathing and feeling some need for power to act out these fantasies in his mind, to draw them and things like that, and we see him watching pornography all the time, and he's obsessed with that, and to feel like he has some kind of power, some kind of control in his life where nobody regards him, nobody sees who he is, even though he is so obsessed in putting forward this image of himself. And it's really telling in scenes where he could have a consensual sexual encounter, he forgoes that. There's the scene in the bathroom where he's got his hands on Lewis's neck, and Lewis turns around and he starts reciprocating those advances, and Patrick Bateman storms out. In fact, his relationship with his girlfriend, it seems like they're completely existing on different planes. There doesn't seem to be interaction there. Whether there's any kind of sexual intimacy, that's something that we never see. And even the way she describes the relationship, oh, all my friends are your friends, and she's got the little toy dog, so maybe Patrick is just her arm candy, and she's his arm candy. Maybe it's just all for show. That could be a very real thing. So even those relationships are fake, and we see all of the relationships he has with his colleagues are superficial. They're all obsessed with status and who has the nicest card and the shade of egg white in the card and the fact that your business card is embossed. It doesn't matter. all these people have the same title, but the fact is the opulence of it. They have these cards coming out of these glass cases and things like that. And we also have this compounded by the fact that there's drug use. Also, obviously, 80s Wall Street culture. We see them doing cocaine. So he could be high a lot of the time and could be imagining all of this stuff. That certainly wouldn't help your mental state when you have these insecurities and these fantasies. He's filling this void with sexual fantasy and with drugs and things like that. So Patrick Bateman is not a reliable narrator. I think that's very safe to say. So if the entire movie of American Psycho is all taking place, and all of the killings are taking place inside of Patrick Bateman's head, the big question is, what is the point of the movie? Really, it's a movie about a very pathetic human being. Patrick Bateman kind of changes from being, he might be creepy, but he certainly isn't as terrifying as we've seen him in the movie. He becomes this very pathetic character, where a pathetic and disturbed character, where he has this deep-seated fantasy life because he has no real relationships, no real connection, no real impact on the world. He's surrounded by superficial people and is himself superficial, and none of that superficiality matters because the image he is presenting to the world is completely forgotten by the world. Remember, this is a character that takes so much pride in their appearance and tries to sound smart. He always tries to say a smart thing. He tries to be politically correct. Oh, don't say the anti-Semitic comments. You only really see him be rude to people when people can't see or hear him. He's rude to a waiter or waitstaff in the restaurant when Paul Allen is, but only after Paul Allen does that. He's obsessed about getting the reservations at Dorsia, being in a place, getting reservations when nobody else can get the reservation, to the point where he lies about it with Jean, and he pretends to get the reservation. He is so obsessed with his image, so for people to forget him is like the ultimate insult. So he acts out in this alter ego, in this fantasy, but none of this actually really happens, because whenever he does have a chance to be intimate with another human being, Lewis in the bathroom, or Jean when he invites Jean back, nothing happens. He's almost afraid of that because, as he says in the beginning, Patrick Bateman is nobody. He believes that he himself is nobody. He is just a projection onto the world. There's nothing inside there. There's a real self-loathing. So he acts out in his brain these power fantasies, which he documents in this journal, and he, of course, obsesses over pornography and things like that. And even the things he's saying about the different music that he says he likes is you're almost wondering if he's concocting all of this stuff to sound smart, because again, there are moments in the movie where he's saying things, he's always doing things to try and look good and sound smart. So he becomes a really pathetic little character, but really what that does to the movie is it kind of kills it, because then in the movie, nothing really happens. If this is all in his head, you're just watching this guy go about his day in a very mundane way, and all the exciting stuff isn't real. What is that really saying? It does still do the message about Wall Street culture, about how it's so superficial, and you get the sense that all of these people are interchangeable. They don't know who anybody is. Oh yeah, I saw Paul Allen in London when Paul Allen wasn't in London, or when people mistake Patrick Bateman for other people. So it does still enforce that message, but then the movie is just a movie where not a lot actually happens if it's all in Patrick Bateman's head. Really, you have this portrait of just a sad little man who hasn't done anything except, he's got some weird obsessions, and he feels completely hollow inside. It becomes a bit of a tragedy in that sense. But while I think this can't be possible, there's just it kind of kills the movie if a lot of the movie doesn't happen, just from a narrative standpoint. The whole "it was all a dream" thing, it just narratively that doesn't work too well if that what happens. But I think the most damning piece of evidence here that some of this had to have happened is because people coming up with this theory, Mary Herron, the director, in response to this said, no, that was never the intent. Like, the director is basically saying outwardly. But, I mean, if we can find evidence in the movie that something's had to have happened, we still have we still have things like going back to Paul Allen's apartment when they're painting over it, and he gets that interaction with the lady there, and that's still in his head. There's the fact that some of these people are people he knows. Right when he's inviting the prostitute to get together with an old friend of his, and he convinces her to make out with the prostitute. That's a real person who must exist. Otherwise, his fantasy is so elaborate that he's creating characters he has a history with, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. We can maybe imagine away some of the characters, like the old lady, where he blows her away after trying to feed the cat to the vending machine, and characters who aren't really established. But when there is an established character, we know Patrick Bateman fixates on appearances and details, so he would know who real people are. He wouldn't just, I don't really think he would be imagining elaborate characters with large backstories. I don't think he's because at that point he's basically a guy alone in a shack just creating an entire world inside his head, and I don't think that's what the movie is going for. We don't really see any evidence to that. But I mean, again, the kind of smoking gun here is the fact that the director outright said, hey, no, this really happened. But it all can't have happened, of course, because we have the scene with the cat and the ATM machine and shooting the cop car so it explodes. We have some really over-the-top stuff which can't be explained even in the context of the movie. So some of it had to have happened. I think we can establish that the cat scene is clearly fake. The cat and the shootout with the cops, that's all really fake. Feed me the cat and ATM machine saying that doesn't make sense even in the context of the movie. There's no reason why that would happen. There would be a kitten conveniently placed right there, or the lady coming up seems out of the blue, and the fact that he shoots the cop car, it explodes like an action movie. He looks at the gun like, what is going on? And he's able to run away from that. That doesn't make sense in the context of the movie. I think we can safely say that is all imagined. But I think that's the only bit in this movie that actually is in Patrick Bateman's head. And I'm going to explain why that happens. And it all has to do with Patrick Bateman's fear and his need for control. Those are two things that are kind of linked. So we've talked about how he needs to project this image onto the world, but in terms of his need for control and feeling like there's a loss of control, that's when we see things start to shift in Patrick Bateman. He's able to do most of his crimes, most of his murders, in a controlled environment. Patrick Bateman doesn't always do things that are illegal. Sometimes he just does things that are lewd, whether it's having pornography at work or the sketches. Even his first encounter with the two prostitutes, Christy and Sabrina. At first, it's just a menage a trois. He's self-obsessed. He's concerned about more his appearance and himself than the other two prostitutes. And we find out later, Christy says, I might need to go to the hospital. Clearly, she still wants the money. There still is enough impetus there for her to get back in the car and take more money and go back with Patrick Bateman. She might not like it, but I don't think she thinks she's going to get killed at that point. So there is some level of control that he has over his impulses, and we see him lose that. Little things will make him lose that throughout the course of the movie. But the real telling line comes in Paul Allen's apartment. He kills Paul Allen because Paul Allen says he can get a reservation at Dorsia when Patrick Bateman can't. So he's jealous of Paul Allen and he kills him for that. So he kills Paul Allen, goes back to Paul Allen's apartment to make it look like he's left town, which manages to confuse the detective played by Willem Dafoe. And at first, he says he's immediately scared because Paul Allen's apartment basically has a wide expanse. It's overlooking, I think, Central Park or something like that, and you get the sense that he's a little worried he might be seen. So that's the thing. The real telling thing is in the second encounter with Christy, where he ends up going too far. We see him at moments he's able to stop himself. He's about to choke Lewis in the bathroom, but Lewis turns around and he thinks it's a sexual advance, and Patrick Bateman walks away. He can't bring himself to kill him. Even you see the way his arms are around Lewis's neck. It's not super aggressive. It's very slow and it's almost gentle, and you can kind of understand why Lewis would have this misconception, because it doesn't really look like he's going in for the kill, or he's able to stop himself. And then there's of course the scene later with Jean where he basically says that Jean should go because he might end up hurting her. Jean thinks this is emotional because of course Patrick is still with Reese Witherspoon's character, and he thinks that he means, oh, emotionally I'm going to hurt you, kind of thing. He is able to stop himself at previous moments before he goes too far. But then when he's with his old friend and they've reunited and Christy is there and he draws blood and Christy runs away and he chases her with the chainsaw and chases her out into the hallway, out of a closed environment. Remember, all of these encounters are happening in closed environments. They're happening in Paul Allen's apartment. They're happening in his apartment. Even with Lewis, he's in the bathroom, which isn't super controlled, but at least it's private. But as soon as she goes out into the real world and he murders her with the chainsaw, that's when everything switches, and that's when we see the interaction with the cat and the ATM machine and shooting the police car so it explodes. And what happens immediately after that is telling, because all of this weird stuff happens. Everything else is bizarre and surreal, but in the context of the movie, Patrick Bateman, knowing he's a predator, a serial killer, has these kind of patterns. But it's all in a framework which he can understand. He might not understand why he has these impulses, but he recognizes that they're real and he acts on them. But then later on, when he goes out into the real world and stuff starts happening that he can't explain, he's gone too far. And for me, this is like a telltale heart thing. The murderer in the telltale heart hears the heartbeat under the floorboards, and some people say that's his guilt, some people say that's his insanity, but it's an indication that he can't keep going with this. I mean, arguably, the character in the telltale heart would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the beating of the hideous heart, right? So, with Patrick Bateman, it's the same thing. We've seen him at moments being able to control his impulses. He won't hurt Jean, and he initially he hurts the prostitutes, but he doesn't kill them, and he won't hurt Lewis. There are moments where he gets to a certain point and then he pulls himself back. But at this point he's gone too far. His victim has run out into the real world and he feels vulnerable. So he fantasizes a bunch of weird things happening and he knows, I can't get away with this. So the first thing he does is call his lawyer. It's not because he feels guilty about it, it's because he knows he's going to be caught. That's very important. So he goes to his lawyer, he confesses everything, because your lawyer is the one person you can tell people to in confidence, and your lawyer is the person who can help you get off, can actually help Patrick Bateman. He knows he's gone too far. So the insanity that's happening is like an alarm bell going off in Patrick Bateman's brain, and it's an alarm bell that's telling him, you're out of control, to the fact where his perception of reality is no longer in his control anymore. It's an alarm bell, and the thing he does immediately after is he runs away and he tries to get help. So why is this the only moment that's imagined when other weird thing happens? How come nobody remembers who he is? How come people always mistake his identity? How did somebody see Paul Allen in London when Patrick Bateman killed him? How come he goes to Paul Allen's apartment and none of the evidence of the murders, none of the bodies in the closet, how come everything is painted over and it's gone? Well, these are all things that can be explained in real world. To begin with, we know that the identities of these people are tenuous and interchangeable. Patrick Bateman is focused on his identity because no one remembers him. He's got the job of someone, he's got a similar job or an identical job title to someone else. So Paul Allen thinks that he is that person. His lawyer doesn't even know who he is. All of these people are interchangeable. Signifiers of identity, your look, your appearance, the fake opinions that Patrick Bateman, the things he says to sound good and sound polite and sound correct. Remember, this is a person who who kind of hates himself and kind of knows they're a bad person. Deep down, he knows you're not supposed to act like this. So he puts on this facade of respectability. Hey, don't make anti-Semitic comments. It's one of the first things he says in the movie. Or, we have to be concerned about social ills. He's got that long speech in the bar where everybody is just listening in stunned silence because it sounds like he's just reciting something that somebody wrote for him. It sounds like almost a political speech. And people just say, well said, Patrick. But they're almost kind of stunned because it sounds so fake. It's the correct thing that you would say, but it's not actually how he feels deep down. So that's an important signifier. He's so obsessed with identity because nobody notices him. Nobody has a high opinion of him. Everybody he meets, Paul Allen and his lawyer later on, basically call him weak, basically say he's ineffectual. Oh yeah, Patrick Bateman, who is he? And don't even recognize him. They don't even see him. So his sense of identity really, really tenuous. But we establish early on in the film, and this comes back later, that he's interchangeable. And the fact all of these people are as obsessed as Patrick Bateman about themselves as Patrick Bateman is. Like kind of the metatextual here is everybody is a sociopath on some level. Patrick Bateman is just an extreme version of that. But everybody is a self-absorbed narcissist. That's why people think, oh yeah, I saw Paul Allen in London. The detective says that, oh, somebody reported seeing him there. And they report that Paul Allen was at a lunch with a whole bunch of people, including Patrick Bateman. This is regurgitated to the detective, and the detective says this back to Patrick Bateman. He's like, oh yes, I must have been there. He's interchangeable as all of these people. They all have the same job title. They're all superficial. There's actually very little substantive about them down below. They're nothing. There really isn't anything to any of these people that of any real consequence or value, because they're so self-obsessed and obsessed with image. Ironically, being obsessed with image actually makes you interchangeable and forgettable. It's interesting how that's a part of the commentary here. But we know these people are so self-obsessed that they just see, oh yeah, there's Patrick Bateman. They just assume it's him because he's like everybody else. And we see Patrick Bateman is trying very hard to conform. He's trying to be very much like other people. He as much as says that in the movie. So when you conform so much and you're so obsessed with identity and everybody is obsessed with status and everybody is obsessed with the same thing, everybody's interchangeable, that's why nobody recognizes or remembers that it's him, that it's Patrick Bateman. He's forgettable. That's one of the reasons why he can get away with this. Another reason is because you don't expect a Wall Street big shot to go around murdering people. The detective, played by Willem Dafoe, as much as says it in the movie. He says, I don't think one of Paul Allen's friends murdered him for no reason. He's probably just gone somewhere. We can see that his suitcase is gone. I'm just following up. He's gone somewhere I don't think one of his friends killed him for no reason. I mean, you could read into Willem Dafoe's performance. It's done right on the edge where does he suspect Patrick Bateman? Does he not? But I think a lot of that is Patrick Bateman's own paranoia. I think he wants to go to lunch with Patrick Bateman because Patrick Bateman will end up paying for the lunch and it'll be fancy. He's a detective. I don't know what his salary is, but I think he just wants to get a fancy meal out of it. I think that's all he really wants, because in that interaction he tells Patrick Bateman, I don't think you really could have done it. So what was the point of this interaction? What does Willem Dafoe want in this scene? I think he just wants a nice meal. I think he just wants food. I think this is a place he doesn't normally go to. And Patrick Bateman says early on, like, oh, I'm going to go to this restaurant. It's very good. And I can get in there. Like, he gets that sense from him that he lives in this kind of world. And you can even see him kissing Patrick Bateman's ass a little bit in the beginning. Patrick Bateman is on the phone. He's got a fake phone call. And he's making up nonsense. It doesn't sound like business. It sounds all personal, what he's talking about on this phone. And you can even see he's got a videotape and some pornography just out on his desk, which Willem Dafoe sees. And Willem Dafoe says, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know you guys are busy. Like, he's a type, right? Which is very much part of the movie. Patrick Bateman is a type. He's a Wall Street type. So you don't suspect this guy. You just wouldn't suspect this guy because he has the veneer of respectability about him. That's the whole thing. He's trying to fit in, he's trying to conform, he's trying to be respectable, but deep down he knows he's not. None of these people are particularly respectable. We hear the things they say. They say some very disparaging things. Patrick Bateman is somebody who actually does some very terrible things as well. But these people are all hollow, all vapid. You don't suspect them of doing anything terrible. You just, you see that veneer of respectability, and they're all forgettable. They're all interchangeable. And the kind of final thing there is where he goes back to the apartment and everything is painted over, all the bodies are gone, and the landlady says something very key, which I think proves that this is a real sequence. This all really happened. She says, she's got this very grave expression on when Patrick Bateman is asking what's happening with Paul Allen's apartment, and she says, please don't make any trouble, just leave. She just wants to flip and sell this house. She's as self-interested as any other character in this movie, whether it's Defoe wanting to get a meal, or all of these Wall Street guys trying to seem like a big shot, or this lady who just wants to flip and sell her apartment. She doesn't care. There's also kind of a meta level where if you're rich and people see you as respectable, you can get away with anything. But another point to the whole idea of you wouldn't suspect someone like this is Patrick Bateman is putting Paul Allen's body in a bag into the trunk of a taxi, right on a busy street. A colleague of his sees him and remarks, "Oh, where did you get that bag? It looks really nice." You wouldn't suspect someone like Patrick Bateman to be burying a body in the middle of the night. Or I think he says at one point he's dissolving it in a bathtub somewhere. I can't remember where. But you wouldn't suspect that of him. So, he's just got an overnight bag. And it looks really nice. That's what people notice. They're superficial. And you just wouldn't suspect someone with this veneer of respectability of being a serial killer. So that's why he gets away with it. That explains all of the other pieces of the puzzle. The only thing he's hallucinating is a plot-specific thing, and it's very clever. It's an alarm bell. It's going off in Patrick Bateman's head. It's telling him things have gone too far. You have lost control, so his perception of reality is no longer in his control. He's hallucinating things. Remember, this is a guy with a power fantasy, so shooting a cop car with a gun and making it explode like he's an action hero is something that his mind might concoct, but it is an alarm bell because even he knows, okay, he stepped back too far from reality. If he keeps going, he's going to get caught, he's going to go to jail. There will be no mercy. But the damning thing for him, kind of the realization he has at the end of the movie is, honestly, he can be as perverted as this, as messed up as this, keep doing these vile things, these horrible things, killing people, murdering people, abusing sexual partners, whatever it is, and there will be no repercussions because he's rich, people don't expect it of him, and people don't remember him. Also, I think there's an element of people would just like a sensible explanation. Like at the end, he does scare the lawyer a little bit when he keeps insisting, I'm Patrick Bateman, I made this phone call to you, I really did kill people, and the lawyer says, no, that's impossible, it's not funny anymore, I saw Paul Allen twice while I was in London. So there's another element there where, like with the landlady, this lawyer could be covering something up. Or maybe the lawyer even just doesn't want to admit to himself that, yeah, he saw Paul Allen. He saw a guy in London who he thought was Paul Allen. Maybe that's not actually Paul Allen. But sometimes the more sanitized explanation is the better explanation, or the more convenient explanation. What is more comforting? Admitting that you just mistook someone's identity, or somebody is playing an elaborate practical joke, or admitting that someone who you thought was respectable is actually a serial killer. It's a lot easier for the self-narratives of these people to just kind of brush Patrick Bateman's crimes, his oddness, his eccentricities under the rug. Because again, these are all horrible people. They're just high on cocaine all the time. They're doing whatever with whoever. They're, abusing drugs and alcohol. They're abusing their own sexual partners. They're obsessed with their image, and there's nothing really to them. And that's the kind of thing. Patrick Bateman is maybe ahead of the curve in terms of some of his peers because he's aware that there's nothing to him. That is the tragedy, if you want to call it that, of Patrick Bateman. He knows he's an empty human being, and he's trying to fill that hole with sex and with drugs and with extreme violence and with murder and with mayhem. He says at one point, he admits to cannibalism at one point, eating people's brains. And that's the thing we see in actual serial killers. There is a veneer of respectability. Like, people said that Jeffrey Dahmer was very charismatic, and that's why he was able to get away with a lot of things. Ted Bundy came across as very intelligent, very well spoken. He was a lawyer. People don't really want to admit there's something wrong when they see something wrong. So that's another element to this story. But yeah, kind of the metatextual here is that Patrick Bateman actually did all these things, but he can continue doing these things. There's another element here that's very interesting. A lot of serial killers want to be caught, or I think there is an element to that where they will turn themselves in. You look at, they talk about it when, they got sloppy with their crimes. They were usually so careful. Then they got sloppy, and that can be seen as a cry for help. Or you have people like Ed Kemper, who just turned himself in. And he turned himself in because he said, I knew I could get away with this forever. It had to stop. He knew what he was and what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't control himself. And we see that in Patrick Bateman. He gets to a point where he can't control himself, so he goes to confess. And again, I don't think that's so much out of guilt. I think that's out of self-preservation. But he also knows, he has to stop. He has to control this somehow. He has to get back into control. Because remember, he's not in control of his image, how people perceive him. And he's very obsessed with that. But the thing that makes this a tragedy is that this is a monster who will keep being a monster unless something forces him to stop, and nothing ever will. There never will be repercussions for Patrick Bateman. He can keep doing this forever. He will never be remembered. No one will ever suspect him. And that's the thing. Because his identity, even though he cares about it so much, because he's so forgettable, people, it's twofold. First of all, people will forget that he's ever there, or they'll misremember him being somewhere where he wasn't. Like when the detective says that story, there's one of your friends said that they were hanging out with you and Paul Allen a little while ago. You were all having dinner together, and he's like, I just forgot. Because all of these people are interchangeable, he will be misremembered as being somewhere he wasn't. There will always be an alibi, always be an excuse. You'll have people covering things up, like the landlady, because she just wants what she wants. You'll have people just not suspecting him because he's so forgettable and he's so weak. He's so ineffectual. How could he ever do something like that? And then there's the detective who's just like, why would one Wall Street guy just kill another for no reason? It wouldn't happen. There's no reason for this to happen. There's no reason for me to suspect you, Patrick Bateman, of being a sociopath. So, you know what? Let's just get on with our dinner. I can't afford this, but you can. That's my reading of it anyway. So I think it's very clear when you kind of look at all the evidence, all the pieces together, that Patrick Bateman was a psychopath. He did kill a lot of people, but just that very specific window of time, feeding the cat to the vending machine, shooting the lady in the alley, and shooting the cop car until it exploded, that was all in his head. None of that actually happened, but I think everything else in the movie did. I think there's clear evidence for it. I think there's clear in-world reasons why all this stuff would be happening, and I think the reason why you have that break from reality is because Patrick Bateman has gone too far, even for Patrick Bateman. He's lost control to the level where he'll be found out, or he'll just keep doing worse things, and it's an alarm bell ringing telling him, you have to stop, you have to do something, and immediately we see him make that confession to the lawyer. So that's what I think is going on in American Psycho. It's an amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, I don't know why you've stuck with me for this long, but if you haven't, go see it. It's fantastic. Christian Bale's performance is amazing. He is so good. He sounds sometimes like a game show host, and like how fake this persona is he's putting on. It's such a good vocal performance and physical performance. It's really good. It's a really solid supporting cast as well. It's really well directed, really well told. Mary Herron does an amazing job with the directing of this. I saw the extended cut or the definitive cut recently. I don't even know what you would cut from this. The movie's not even 2 hours long in the extended cut, but everything seems perfect. Everything seems perfectly in place there. It doesn't go on too long. It's always interesting. It's always entertaining. It's always fascinating. And unlike some movies that just go arty and weird and kind of break their own rules and kind of don't even really have a reason for it, the breaks of reality here are very deliberate. Again, I think it's just this one moment, and it's very telling about everything else that happens in the movie and the final act of the movie. Yes, Patrick Bateman is a crazy serial killer, but he's able to hide in plain sight because nobody will ever recognize him. Excuses will always be made for him. He'll be given a lot of leeway because of his perceived status, and he will never be held accountable for his actions. He's just going to keep on being a monster, and the personal hell of knowing what you are, having these urges, acting on them, and not being able to control it. The big hell, I think, for Patrick Bateman is the fact that he doesn't have any control. He tries so hard to be noticed. He tries hard to be noticed by fitting in. That's his problem here. He tries to cover up his true nature, cover up, then fill the hole of the fact that there's nothing inside him. Again, he begins the movie by telling us there is no Patrick Bateman. He's got a very low opinion of himself. There's nothing there to Patrick Bateman that isn't entirely superficial or constructed, and the real thing that is there is monstrous. So that's my reading of American Psycho. Again, it's a great movie. Go see it if you haven't seen it. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Film School, and I will see you next time.